Students at universities spend a lot of money on their university education. They are charged to learn. And there's a temptation for universities, therefore, to treat students primarily as customers. And I think that's a bad idea, and I think I've got a better one. I have been a student and I have been an educator at universities for nearly 40 years, and I love it, and it's still a big part of my life right now. I love what universities do. They share information, they encourage debate, they help students find their new identity and grow their strengths. They do research, they support debate, they provide a haven for unpopular ideas. I love all of that. So I'm delighted to see that around the world we now have more universities and more students than ever going on to higher education. There are over 200 million students in higher education around the world right now, and that is going to develop into well over 260 million by 2025. But the supply can't keep up with the demand in terms of volume, in terms of quality, and in terms of location. Students are spending a lot of money on their education, but I don't think that means we should see students simply as customers. In the US, the cost of a family car 40 years ago was the same basic core cost, adjusted for inflation, as it is now. University tuition has increased threefold in that time. In the UK, the charges for fees now are £9,000, tripled from a few years ago and tripled from nearly 10 years ago, and they may increase further. So maybe students are paying for their higher education, and maybe we should treat them as customers, because surely they have rights as customers, and we need to have a contract. I think that's a bad idea, and I think I've got a better one. People who want to treat students as customers say, well, it will empower them. I don't think that's true at all, because it narrows our perceptions of a student's potential. It narrows our perceptions of how we can help students. It narrows students' perceptions of themselves and what they can do. If your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And if your students all look like customers, then every engagement with a student feels like part of a commercial transaction. If we define students as customers, by default we define the university as a supplier, and there's a contract between them. But in those circumstances, in my view, the contract is not a bridge, it's a wall. All of this is a bit of a paradox. At the very moment when universities are treating students more like customers, real business in the commercial world is increasingly treating their customers like students, encouraging purchasers to review goods, to explore the pros and cons, to argue for and against different kinds of consumer choices, and then saying what a great time they had, or what a terrible time they had when they had that purchase. Many companies now increasingly are de facto crowdsourcing their marketing, crowdsourcing their quality assurance, and crowdsourcing their product development by encouraging customers to think of themselves as knowledge agents, sharing and checking information and becoming more expert in the use of a certain product or service. One of the key areas where this is very important is what's often called big data. All of the millions of transactions, the millions of decisions that people make in their everyday lives are increasingly important for all kinds of reasons, but they have a commercial value. Students, when they log on to a distance learning program, or when they swipe their card through the library, or turn up and check into a classroom, or buy something from the student shop, or take a few days off because they're not well, all that data can be captured by a university. And it's sometimes described as learning analytics. It's a huge amount of data. Data is the new oil, as they say. And oil has a value, and data has a value, and student data is particularly valuable. Some social media companies sell transactions of that type for $70 million to $100 million a year. People like Visa have huge divisions just set up to manage analytic data and to sell the big data to other commercial entities. EDUCAUSE, brilliant organization that provides excellent advice to US universities, recently, when talking about MOOCs, massive online open courses, which are generally free, generally given away, pointed out to senior managers in the US that the number one feature of any business plan to make this work commercially has to be to sell the learning analytics data. Thank goodness that here in the UK, JISC has got a new set of regulations to manage the way that that data is protected. If we think about students as customers, there's a temptation to sell what we know about them, and that's a bad idea. And I think I've got a better one. Students as customers cannot afford to pay for the thing they want, which is their education, so they borrow the money. In the UK, about £10 billion is loaned every year to students for their higher education. That is going to be, within the next 12 months, approximately £50 billion in total for a relatively small country. By the middle of this century, the estimate is, by the Student Loan Company, that the total amount of money owned by British students is going to be £330 billion. Students are in debt. And that's money taken out of the economy. Cast a shadow of how much that students do when they graduate. In the US, the total amount of student debt is now in excess of $1.2 trillion and growing all the time. That is more than the total amount of debt on US adult credit cards. It is a huge figure, and it's growing. Now, some people say, well, students are customers. They are paying for their higher education. Well, I have a view about that in the first instance. The simplest way of stopping students being customers and stopping students being in debt is to give them higher education for free. But we are not there yet. Some people say, well, we should treat students as customers to give them new rights, to look after them, to give them a good experience, customer service in the library, discounted fees for graduates, special premia if you do really well. And some universities are even suggesting that you get a money-back guarantee if you don't get a great job after doing your course. That's a bad idea, and I think I've got a better one. To me, treating students as customers is neither a necessary nor a sufficient condition to treat students well. It is not inevitable, and where it has happened, it is not irreversible, in my opinion. Let's drill down and think about this a little bit more detail. I believe that treating students as customers primarily is bad for students, it's bad for employers, and it's bad for universities and for society. Why is it bad for students? Well, first of all, students, if they start to think of themselves as customers because the government's treating them as customers and universities are tempted to treat them as customers, when they come to identify the best university for them, see it as being a commercial purchase. So start to take into account issues about cost and possible returns. When students are thinking about whether they're doing well, whether they've been successful at university, there's a temptation that they will start to think in commercial terms. What has been the return on my investment? Overlooking the other things that universities can give, the other things that should be important in terms of an education. When students are reflecting on whether they're doing well and whether they're having a good time, the danger is they will start to see themselves in terms of whether or not they are a successful customer. Treating students as customers is bad news for employers, and we don't often think about this, in my opinion. First of all, students who are treated as customers, who believe themselves to be customers, because the customer role is essentially a passive one, start to have a passive relationship with knowledge. If students believe they are customers, the customer role is really quite a risk-averse one, because someone's sorting it out for you. So students' relationship with knowledge starts to become a rather conservative one, and they won't take risks. If you think you're a customer of higher education, there's a danger, if you're a student, that you will finish up failing to see the importance of learning from mistakes. If you think of yourself as a customer, if something doesn't go quite well in your learning, in your engagement with knowledge, it feels like you're not getting the product you paid for, if we're not careful. So the other aspect is, of course, that students who think of themselves as customers tend not to build up confidence and communication strengths because customers don't have to have that. Ironically then, the more we treat students as customers, the more it is the case that when they get a job, they themselves are unable to really look after customers because they themselves have been so passive. So treating students as customers is bad for students because it can make them passive and risk-averse and fail to learn from experience and fail to develop communication and confidence in relation to knowledge, when the biggest and most important jobs for graduates are in the knowledge economy. Treating students as customers, I think, is bad news for universities and for society. Because the role of a customer is essentially an individual one, you've paid for your education, not for someone else's, on your course. It tends to atomize the student experience. Students just find themselves structurally thinking about their own relationship to what they have paid for. So it disconnects students from other students. It also disconnects students from the research community in a university. Students are thinking they're there to get the degree, to learn, and that's great, and it's really important. And I'm the first to recognize that getting your degree for an individual from a family that's maybe not had the best opportunities in life, or been marginalized, universities are transformational. So you want to get your degree, but a really good degree has to have research at the heart of it. You're in a university community, unique in society, almost, with researchers who are pushing back the boundaries of discovery. But if you think of yourself as being a customer and you bought the service of a degree, you don't see those things quite so well. You can't identify how they are connected to you. So treating students as customers disconnects the student from the discovery of knowledge that might be going on in the very next door to where they're being taught. Treating students as customers disconnects students from learning, because really good teaching, really good curriculum design should have students at the heart of it. Students are developing their skills, of course. We are, I am, everyone is in some way a learner. But you want to contribute to what you're being taught. And treating a student as a passive customer creates a firewall between the development of a course to be taught and the receipt of that course being taught. Treating students as customers separates them and disconnects them from their university. It defines the student as a recipient, it defines the university as a provider. It separates through contract in a way that should be able to bring people together. Disconnect, disconnect, disconnect. That's what treating a student as a customer does. And yet, everything we know about sustainability, everything we know about civil society, everything we know about developing humanity tells us that we should be creating not disconnection, but connection. Connections are what make things great and powerful. Universities should be a powerhouse of connectivity, not treating students as customers to atomize them and separate them from all the things that matter. So what do we do? What is the better idea? Every student wants to be treated as an individual, and students are. Everyone is. But students, like all learners, like all of us, want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And that should be the case at university more than in any other place in society. We can work together on this. We don't want students to be passive and compliant and risk-averse. We want students who are active and debating and discovering and partners in educational development. We want students to be able to shape their learning. We want students to shape the learning of others. We want students to understand how they can learn from each other. We want students to understand how they can support the learning of other people. We want students to be part of design teams. We really should want students to be part of research and development teams. As apprentices, yes, but part of them. not just a recipient of the output. That's the really important thing. Because at the end of the day, this is the big idea. We should not be treating students as customers because it's bad for students, it's bad for employers, it's bad for universities, it's bad for society at large. The most courageous thing that any university can do is treat its students as educators. Get students in the classroom, tear down the walls, get students in front of the class and teaching, get students as part of course development teams, get students to define the assessments, get them to understand the way they can help others. Students are incredibly powerful at understanding what they don't know. They're incredibly powerful at understanding how they want to be taught. They don't have the long expertise, the long experience that some of the tutors will have, but they also are expert in themselves and in each other. We should make students educators. We want students who are active. We want students who are innovative. If you teach someone for 3 years, you teach them for 3 years. If you turn students who want to into educators, they will educate themselves for a lifetime. Universities are fantastic things. They're not perfect, but they are innovations. We shouldn't ask what kind of metaphor we should use to describe students. Universities and their relationship with students should be the metaphor for the rest of society. Inclusive, supportive, innovation, risk-taking, not being afraid of new ideas, not having a contract that separates, but a compact that brings people together. And that is my better idea. We don't want to have the relationship between universities and its students defined by a commercial contract. What we want and what we need is that relationship to be defined by compassionate connectivity. And that's my idea. Thank you very much indeed.